Shalom, everyone. So we are going to begin to discuss today the question that we raised of how should Orthodoxy relate to other denominations, specifically Reform and Conservative. You might want to raise some other denominations, but I don't think they are significant in numbers, both in the United States, maybe other countries, and certainly not in Israel. Whereas Reform and Conservative have significant numbers, certainly in the US, some places in Europe, maybe other places in the world that I am not familiar with, and also in Israel. I actually have become, in the last couple of years, more acquainted with many men, rabbis, and female in the Reform movement. They're called Rabbah. Not sure in the conservative movement. There are also Rabbanim Yisraelim. There are even Rabbanim Chilonim, non-religious rabbis, meaning it's a movement that is non-religious, doesn't believe in religion, but it has rabbis, meaning they see significance in the Jewish tradition as not as a religion, not as a belief, as a culture of the people of Israel, and they want to encourage it in Israeli society and things like that. So they are non-religious rabbis in a non-religious movement, but they're called rabbis. So we have Rabbanim Yisraelim, Rabbanim Chilonim, Conservativim, Reformim, all kinds. I'm not going to discuss all these details. We're going to try and relate to conservative and reform, but I have become more acquainted with many of these, not many, but some of these this variety of people. And that will be, by saying that, I'm saying something about my attitude, that I am not, totally rejecting everybody and not befriending anyone and not cooperating with anyone. I have certain ties, but maybe we'll get to that later. I would like to use for our discussion a certain booklet that I didn't bring. It's in Hebrew. In the same movement that I work in that tries to influence religious education in Israel and religious communities in Israel. The movement has put out all kinds of little booklets about different issues of modern religion, such as questions of men and women in society, such as how we relate to non-Jews, such as how we relate to work, meaning is it bitul Torah? Is it, you're supposed to learn Torah all day and all night. How can you go to work? And so we have a booklet about that, all kinds of different things in a moderate, positive connection between religion and modern values and things like that. And just about a few years ago, a rabbi, his name is Arav Ronen Luvitz, he is the rabbi of Moshav Nir Etzion. Nir Etzion is off Road 4. If you take Road 4 from Har Tzomet Anana to Haifa, so before you get to Haifa, you turn right, turn east. There's a moshav there called Nir Etzion. He's the rabbi there. He is also the president of this movement called Ne'emanei Torah V'Avodah, about advocating for the values of moderate, positive, modern religion, Zionist religion in Israel. And he wrote a booklet about, it's called in Hebrew, Ha'im Lizrom im Hazramim. Lizrom is to flow. Zramim is the Hebrew word we use for denominations. There are different channels, so to speak. There's a source of water, and the water flows in different channels. Like it can have a few different rivers, might be a word that's too big. You have a word for something smaller than rivers, like
Stream.
Sorry?
Stream.
Creek, rivulet, really small.
Okay. Streams. I'll go with stream. Oh, now I'm echoing. Wait. I'll try to do it again without echo. It's working. When I mute everyone, there's no echo. So when it's necessary to speak up, we'll have to hear you and then mute everyone again. In any case, so the idea is that these are different streams of Judaism. The water is flowing in different parallel lines or separate lines. And the question is, should we flow with the flow? Should we flow with the streams? And they'll say, okay, so we're Orthodox, you're conservative, you're Reform. We're flowing, we're natural, we're easy, we're complacent. It's okay. We can all do our thing. Or should we be strict? Should we oppose? Should we struggle against? What exactly should we do? So he wrote a booklet about this. And as part of my work, I was asked to call it proofread. It's not proofreading for catching mistakes in Hebrew. It was proofreading kind of to say, make comments on, you said this too extreme, you didn't say this extreme enough, you weren't clear, things like that. So maybe I even had a small influence on the final product of this booklet. But I also, because of that, I also had the booklet on my computer. And then what I did is, in order to bring it to other people, I made a shortened version for myself, very shortened, like I'll show you in a second. It's like partial sentences. It's not full sentences. It's like dot, 5 words, 10 words. I'm putting as short as I can to get the ideas. And I'm going to try to use this. It's in Hebrew. I don't have it in English. I asked the CEO of this movement, are we going to translate it into English? He said to me, I'll tell you this in Hebrew. He said to me, Lo tzarich. We don't need it in English. About a year ago, Rav Ido Pechter put out a booklet. It was called something about moderate religion. He put it out in Hebrew, and then it was translated into English. In the last couple of weeks, I've been bringing a few to shul every Shabbat, and I'm happy to see them disappear in English. Mark took one of them, picked it up, was looking at it exactly. What's that? What does it say there? Moderate religious Zionism, exactly. Rabbi Dr. Ido Pechter. So that one we translated into English. So I asked, are we going to translate the one about the streams, the denominations, into English? He said to me, it's not necessary, because the Israelis are the ones who are very antagonistic towards the other denominations, and the Americans, the Anglos, they're used to it from the countries of their origin. They're more, they get along easier with other denominations. They're not not so powerful against it. They can disagree, but they're not so pushy against it, pushing against it. I wonder if that's true, or maybe it should be translated into English. But maybe for younger people whose family, well, they can do the Hebrew. I don't know. So I'm not sure if it's going to be, right now it's not being translated into English. I have the shortened version that I will show you soon. And what I'd like to do is, it's going to take a while. It's going to take more than this evening to start going through some points that he makes there. And I think the first thing is to understand what these movements are. What are their values? What are their concepts? What are the building stones that bring them to their decisions? I will comment. I will say I am not very familiar. I am not familiar in a detailed way with the history of the Reform or conservative movements, or with the details of how they make the decisions, reach the decisions, and so on. So if any of you have comments about something that Rabbi Luvitz is going to describe, and you want to say, no, I know something different, whether you are or were or studied or whatever in one of the movements, or you have personal knowledge about it, please speak up. We will unmute you, we'll hear you with an echo, and then we'll mute everyone again. One other thing before we start. Last week, as we say, Mishamayim, or in Yiddish, it was Bashert, right? Rabbi Gustavo is the rabbi of the conservative minyan, the davens right next to us, in the building right adjacent to us. And we get along fine. And they're having an evening about Rabbi Heschel. who was himself, I'm not sure, I think an Orthodox person in his own personal life. He taught at JTS, the seminary of the conservative movement in the United States. And they're making an evening about his personality, his Torah, things like that. And Rabbi Gustavo sent it out in a group in the city, in a WhatsApp group in the city with other rabbis, Orthodox rabbis. And it created a stir, it created an argument between the Orthodox rabbis. Some were saying, what is this? Why are we cooperating with this conservative? Why are we studying this? Why is the religious council supporting them financially? All kinds of things like that. And Rabbi Gustavo himself answered, and other people participated in the discussion about it. I will not mention names who said what, because I don't think it's right to take out of a WhatsApp group and tell you what somebody else wrote in the discussion. But I have to say, with all the discussion, with all the argument, I was positively surprised in one sense. There were not tens of rabbis attacking or being very powerfully critical of the decision to allow them or for the religious council to support and do this as one of the religious activities in town. There were a few, but not a large number. There were 3 rabbis in Ra'anana, Orthodox rabbis, I know them all personally, who were being more moderate. Were saying, this is part of the people, they're part of the society, the religious council has to, we can disagree with them, but the religious council can't ignore them. And even saying, we disagree with them, but certainly outside of Israel, what they do is keeping people in touch with their religion and not pushing people away. They're not taking people from Orthodoxy and turning them conservative and reform. They're taking people who, without these shuls, these communities, these movements, will be totally disconnected or more disconnected. So this keeps them more connected to their Judaism rather than less connected. The other rabbis were claiming they are making a fake Judaism. It's one thing if a person is not religious. I'm not religious. I'm not claiming my way is the right way of religion. I'm just not keeping the religion. The religion is Orthodoxy. I'm not keeping it. These people are claiming we are the true religion. That's even more dangerous. So these are the arguments that were going on. And I was positively surprised that 3 of the rabbis were being more moderate in this discussion. Actually, I spoke to Rabbi Gustavo on Friday night when we come out of davening. We met outside under the new canopy there. And he said he was also positively surprised by the number of rabbis who were being more moderate about it. 2 of them no, I shouldn't say, okay, whatever. Three rabbis were being more moderate within the discussion. And then they started sending all kinds of materials as part of the discussion. And one of them sent an article of my teacher, Rav Lichtenstein, in English about this issue. So I don't have it here, but I have it saved on my phone. I said, wow, that's the Basheret. Just in time for this discussion in Kinol David. I'm going to have an article by Rabbi Lichtenstein. I would like to send it by WhatsApp. I have it on my phone. I would like to send it by WhatsApp to anyone who would like me to send it to them. And then we can all read it. And then not only I can describe the points that he brings up. If you're interested, if you're willing, we can all read it. And then we can discuss it sometime like a book club, like an article club. We all read it. Okay, different people raise different points. We might have interesting things to say. So anyone who wants me to send it to them by WhatsApp or by email, I see Tova says yes, Ilana says yes, Eliezer, everybody says yes. Okay, I will try to remember everyone who was here today. Okay, I'll try to remember everyone who was here today and send it to everyone whose phone I have or email I have personally. If not, please contact me and we will make sure that everyone gets it, and then we'll see when we'll get to it because it might not be immediately. So let's start with this material that I have from Rav Luvitz. The first thing he does is to discuss the history And as I said before, the basics of the basic rules or considerations, criteria that the different movements used. And we start with the reform, and then we go to conservative, because that's the history. Because reform was reform, and then conservative said, you're going too far. We want to be more conservative without a capital C. And therefore, we're going to call ourselves conservative with a capital C. So we're going to be less reformative and more conservative, and that created the conservative movement. So we're going to start with the reform. So I'm going to share what I have on my computer, and we'll start discussing it. And please feel absolutely comfortable to comment if you see something that you think he's describing in a way that's not accurate. You see here is his name, Rav Ronen Luvitz. In Hebrew, it's called Hayachas Lazramim Halo Orthodoxy. How to relate to the non-Orthodox streams or denominations. And so he starts the discussion. Introduction. So he says the following. For many years, this issue did not this issue did not trouble the Israeli society. It was in America, certainly, maybe in places outside of America, but not in Israel. It was a non-issue. They were almost non-existent here. But in the last couple of years, it's becoming a public argument, and there's disagreement about it in the Israeli society, and specifically in religious society, because people are not religious. They're fine with, you let everybody do their thing. You give everybody the same taktzivim, no, don't say it, write it in the chat. Taktzivim, the money that the government allocates, okay? You give everyone equally. Budget. Thank you. And anyone, they get the same support from the government or from the municipality. And the laws should be made. You can get married Orthodox, conservative, reform. That's not the situation in Israel. The situation is that you can get married Orthodox and you're recognized in Israel. You get married reform or conservative in Israel, it's not recognized as a legal marriage in the state. You get married outside of Israel and you come with a certificate of marriage, the state accepts it. But if you get married outside of Orthodoxy or by a rabbi who's not recognized in Israel, and you want to be recognized by Israeli law, you go on a trip outside of Israel, you go to a lawyer, and he performs a legal marriage, which is not a religious marriage, and you come back with a document that you're married, and the state of Israel recognizes that and recognizes you as being married. These are some of the things that create controversy in different parts of the society, specifically within the religious society. See here, he says this was a discussion in the 19th century in Europe, in the 20th century in America, and in the 21st century, it made Aliyah to Israel. The discussion, the conflict, made Aliyah to Israel in the 21st century, so here we are. He says there are three basic attitudes towards the other denominations. Attitude number one, stay away from them and fight against them and be negative towards them. Attitude number two, sometimes you have to cooperate because sometimes there are things that are joint interests of the Jewish community. Meaning in the United States, they say in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik that he was opposed to religious cooperation, but was in favor of national cooperation. If we needed to stand up against anti-Semitism or for rights of Jews in the United States or things like that. So we did cooperate, but don't cooperate on religious issues. Don't make joint religious activities or events and things like that. Attitude number three, it is, Orthodox people consider conservative or reform to be something which is not a it's a partial Jewish existence. It's like if you keep some of the mitzvot and not all of the mitzvot. By the way, I will say clearly, person who is Orthodox doesn't mean that person performs all of the mitzvot. It's an individual decision of where I want to belong to, what community, what I believe is right. Doesn't necessarily mean that any person completely keeps all the mitzvot. But the Orthodox person would say that's one thing. Another thing is to say, I believe in keeping only some of the mitzvot. So an Orthodox person would say, person who's Reform or conservative, his religious belief is in keeping part of the mitzvot and not all the mitzvot, because they've canceled some of the mitzvot. We'll discuss this soon. But even though this is an incomplete Judaism, they make a positive contribution to strengthening or retaining Jewish identity. Because for some people, this is going to be their Jewish connection, a religious connection. It's better than not having connection. And he says here in the next sentence, we should cooperate with them in a limited way. We're not going to make tefillot together, but we can meet, we can discuss things, we can look for ways to cooperate that won't bother people. Whether we will strengthen them, maybe have influence on their members, and also for the unity of the Jewish people. Says Arav Lubitz, here on the left you have someone, it's not me, someone else making comments, but Arav Lubitz says, I would like to suggest a fourth attitude. I would like to suggest that in the Israel of the 21st century, I'm not saying what to do in Europe in the 19th century or in the United States in the 20th century. It's water under the bridge in any case. But in Israel in the 21st century, neither one of the three is right. Says Arav Lubitz, I claim that while I have disagreements with the ideology and the practical attitudes, the practicality of the non-Orthodox denominations, cooperation is necessary, and that a change of attitude towards these movements is the right thing to do Jewishly. It's not political, it's not only unity of Am Yisrael, it's the right thing to do Jewishly. So this he's going to discuss later on. The first thing that we'd like to do is to understand a little bit about the history and the beliefs. So he says the following. Kitzur Toldot HaReforma. Here is a shortened version, and I shortened the shortened version of the history of the Reform movement. We are in Germany and Holland of the beginning of the 19th century. And the Reform movement started attracting to itself adults and young people who already had moved away from mitzvot. Until the 19th century, basically the Jewish community was religious, period. Of course, there were some people who kept mitzvot more, some less. There were people who left Judaism, they left the Jewish community. They were individuals. And the Jewish community was very negative, was very, holding hands tightly. And if someone left the mitzvot, they were kicked out. To the extent that people said Shiva over a family member who left religion, but they left Am Yisrael. And in the 19th century, after the French Revolution, there was enlightenment, there was emancipation, things were more flexible, more equality, and Jews were attracted by this. So there were Jews who left the religion, but now their numbers were significant. By the way, there were Christians who left Christianity just as much. People moved away from religion because we used to be under very strict rules of kings. Now that there's more democracy and freedom and so on, so people had more choice and more enlightenment. And enlightenment, if you ask me, of course, enlightenment is not against religion. But the way enlightenment happened in the 19th century is people studied more and religion looked to them to be primitive. So many people left religion. And in the Jewish community, it created a situation where there were Jews who were not religious but remained Jewish. They remained connected. They were married, Jews married to Jews, having Jewish children. Maybe they had a little minimal connection with the religious community, with the community in the religious sense. But their numbers were growing, and they were feeling nikur. Nikur is they were feeling estrangement, being estranged the traditional communities and the Bate Knesset and the synagogues. But they were attracted to reform. The reform movement for them was something they could connect with, be Jewish, and not be so different than the other communities around them, the non-Jewish communities around them. So he says what the reform movement did is it tried to make Judaism similar to the European culture. It was, for instance, they canceled the practical mitzvot. All of the call it what's the word? Pulchan, mitzvot pulchaniyot, commandments, mitzvot of religious. What's the word? Pulchan. Let me try and say it from the other direction.
Sacrifice?
Sacrifice is one form of pulchan. Pulchan is mitzvot that are not, it's not about morality. It's about a commandment just to be religious. What's the word in English for pulchan? I'm missing the word. I'll look it up. I'll keep on talking and look it up at the same time. Try it. In any case, looking up the word. Forms of worship, okay, mitzvot of worship. For instance, tzedakah, Eliezer, you're right. Sacrifices is a form of worship. It does not in any logical way transform our world. If I give tzedakah to a poor person, I'm not performing a mitzvah of worship. I'm helping a human being. I can see with my physical eyes how it's making a difference. It's giving him food. He's not hungry. But if I pray, praying is a form of worship. Celebrating Chagim is a form of worship. So they started cutting out the mitzvot that were mitzvot of worship and keeping mitzvot of being humanistic. They created Jewish life that was very similar to the Protestant Christians in that time. The tefillot were on Shabbat and Chagim, no tefillot during the week, only on Shabbat and Chagim. Just like the Christians have Sunday, we have Shabbat. The experience in Bet Knesset was much more similar to the churches. There was more, you see the word hadal here, it's glamour, meaning, I don't care, give me a chair to sit on, plastic kettle chair, just as an example. Give me a rundown room with a roof above me and air conditioning in the summer. Yes, that's important in Israel. And the roof above us in the winter, maybe heating. And we can pray there. I don't need anything fancy, but the churches were fancy. And if we didn't make the synagogues fancy, people wouldn't come. They'd say, oh, those guys have something much nicer. So they made the shuls, the Reform shuls, made them much fancier than the Orthodox shuls. They put a lot of focus on the musical elements, having a choir and help me out here, this is not the piano, it's called in church, what do they have?
Organ.
Organ, thank you. And so the Reform shul had an orchestra or and they had an organ, and some of the Reform shuls had their prayers in Hebrew, but some of them changed to the language of the state they were in. So they're making it more and more similar to other religions with less and less Jewish elements about it, but it's Judaism, it's Jewish, it's Jews who come The leader, the religious leader, is a rabbi, not a priest. It will be Shabbat and not Sunday. It will be, maybe they will have a prayer on Pesach. I don't know if they will have Leil Seder. They certainly will not be strict about not eating chametz on Pesach. Maybe they will have shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah, but they're certainly not going to refrain from things that are, actions that are forbidden on Yom Tov. These are the kinds of things. So they give them a certain religious experience in being part of a community. There is a form of prayer. There are festive days. There is one day a week that we come to the synagogue, but it's very similar to what we see around us in non-Jewish centers of prayer. Okay, this is the beginning of reform. Here you have Geiger, okay, beginning to give the reform a basis which is more idealistic. It has an ideology, a basis and not idealistic in that sense, more that it's giving a basis of ideology for reform. And that's what he was saying. The mitzvot that are ceremonial are not important. The most important part of mitzvot is the values of morality and justice, of the prophets, meaning Tanakh. The prophets were very critical when Am Yisrael did not act in a moral way, even if we kept the mitzvot of worship and we brought the sacrifices in Beit HaMikdash, but we did not act with morality and justice, so the prophets would criticize Am Yisrael very powerfully. So Geiger says this is the most important part of Yahadut. We don't need the ceremonial mitzvot. We need justice and morality. In Germany, in the 40s, in the 1840s, in Germany, they made a list of radical decisions. Here you have the Hebrew word radikaliot. I will translate that for you into English and explain to you that the word radikali in English is radical. So they made a whole line of radical decisions. No more, you don't have to use Hebrew as the language of prayer. No more Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot. In Israel, we have the first day of Pesach and the seventh day of Pesach. Anywhere outside of Israel, you all know this, the first day of Pesach is 2 days. You have 2 Sdarim. And the last day is 2 days. And the same on Sukkot and on Shavuot. They canceled that. It's 1 day, no 2 days. They took out of the Siddur, the prayer book, they took out all prayers about return to Zion, because we are not interested in Zionism and a Jewish existence outside of our countries. We are happy living in Germany or whatever it is, and we can be Jews and have a synagogue. We don't have to pray to return to Zion. Certainly no prayers for building Beit HaMikdash and renewing sacrifices, the Korbanot. We don't want that. We are staying in Germany, having our synagogue. We're happy with what we have. We don't want to change this. And the aspiration, the longing, that's a good word, longing for redemption is about something universal. Here's another Hebrew word, universalit. The longing for redemption, for Geulah, is about universal things. We don't care about the redemption of the Jewish people, of returning to the land of Israel, of returning the kingdom of Israel, the Beit HaMikdash, or anything like that. Our longing is for an international, universal redemption, peace and love, peace and good, positive connections between all nations. You can understand, I'm going to stop the sharing for a bit. You can understand hearing all this. We're not done. We're only at the beginning. But you can understand that on the one hand, this is attractive for Jews in those countries, in Germany and maybe other places, because it allows them to retain their Judaism while not being too strict about it and being very similar to everyone else around them. We don't have to be so different. We don't have to put on tefillin and a kippah. Probably in shul they wore a kippah. We don't have to strictly keep the laws of Shabbat. We don't have to not eat chametz on Pesach. We can go out with our non-Jewish friends and it doesn't matter. We don't have to keep kosher, but we'll be Jewish, and we'll go and have our prayers in synagogue once a week, just like they do, and we'll have an organ, and it'll be a nice fancy building. So we won't feel different from everyone, and at the same time, we will keep our national religion, so to speak. That's the positive. It keeps them in it. It stops them from totally, assimilating. The negative aspect of it is that the Judaism that they're keeping is so watered down that I'm not sure how much Judaism is left. It's very universal. Peace and good relationships between nations, absolutely, but it's not enough. That is not enough to retain Jewish identity. Coming to pray once a week, it's Shabbat and not Sunday, that keeps something, because it's Shabbat and not Sunday. You don't pray for Eretz Yisrael, you're very powerfully moving away from the nation of Israel. So they're trying to do something that will make those people in the first half of the 19th century in Europe, they will make them happy and they'll feel good in this religious place, but they're watering down the Jewishness of remaining Jewish. So that's, on the one hand, what was needed to do to keep them with some Jewish identity. On the other hand, it's going downhill in what might become something that you will have the headline Jewish, but will remain without anything Jewish about it. Here I expressed my thoughts about it. Let me stop for a moment, and people who want to participate one at a time, unmute yourselves and say what you'd like to say, and I hope that we'll manage with the echoes or without the echoes.
In a way, the discussion is very simple. Of course, when anybody ever says that, then you know it's actually very complex. But the central question is, who is a Jew? If you decide that that people who practice Reform Judaism, or people who practice conservative Judaism, or people who are quite peripheral in terms of their religious beliefs, that they're nevertheless Jewish, then they're Jewish, and we're all one people. If, on the other hand, we say that, well, being Jewish means you have to keep all the mitzvot, then you don't regard them as being Jewish, and then they're not part of the same people.
I will.
Could I jump in for a minute?
Wait. Now you can. I'm being
Okay.
echoed. You're going to be echoed.
Yeah, I think it's me that's causing the echo. Couple of things in response quickly to Mark. It's not so much the damage of people that don't observe that seems to weaken Judaism. It's that they change the rules of who is a Jew. And the Reform movement particularly went to the idea of you're a Jew if your father was Jewish and your mother was not. That's the same as your mother was Jewish and your father is not. And therefore, when these kids intermingle together on birthright programs or anything like that, and they get together and then they want to get married, and if they want to get married by an Orthodox rabbi, oops, one of you is not a Jew. So they've changed definitions, and that's a big problem. I was jotting down a few quick comments about the Reform movement. When in the southern United States, you meet somebody that you think is kind of an idiot, but you want to be polite, you say, "Bless your heart." And we sort of think that a lot with what the Reform movement does. Did they really create a new religion, or did they just water down the old one to the point where there's hardly anything left? I would argue with the rabbis that want to just blow it off completely, that it may be better to have a little of something than absolutely nothing. Because if they have nothing, they're going to drift to something that gives them some sort of spiritual fulfillment. And that's probably not going to be Judaism. As they have watered down prayer, they've also watered down who you're praying to the point that there are now Jewish congregations that think atheism is perfectly Jewish. So there's a problem there. And one of my most vivid memories was hearing a talk from a person who was the head of philosophy at JTS at the time, the conservative seminary. And his topic was, what does Reform and Conservative have in common? And the first thing he said was that neither movement believes in the giving of the Torah on Sinai. So if you don't have that, then why are you going to shul at all? So, you know, they've created a lot of conundrums for the Jewish world.
Can I respond to some of this, please? First of all, historically, I think the conservative and reform movements came to Israel in around 1970. I know that I played for the cello for the dedication of the conservative synagogue in 1978 in Jerusalem, and there was an old conservative synagogue before that. Well, there's a world of difference. Maybe this is premature to talk about this because he essentially talked about the reform movement. There's a world of difference between the reform movement and the conservative movement. I can't hear you.
Yes, please let's separate. Right now, we're talking about reform. And we will get, after we finish the description of reform, we will describe conservative. And then we will be able to discuss it. You might say, I'm opposed to reform. I'm not as opposed to conservative. But right now, let's stay focused on the description of the reform movement in the 1800s. Okay.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know anything about the reform movement in the 1800s. I know
Now
that
you do. Now you do. We discussed a few points.
well, I do know that the Reformed community did keep Seder, and many of them with matzah and not with regular bread and things like that. So it wasn't just giving up all the traditions in order to fit in with the society. But a lot of what he said, I do agree with.
Okay. I would just, Etta, and then I'd like to say something about what Mark said. Etta, b'vakasha.
Well, from what I've learned regarding reform movement is that they almost, some of them anyway, in Fort Worth there's a classical reform, which is a little different than regular reform, I guess, but they don't face to the east on purpose. They call themselves most of them call themselves temple so-and-so because they don't believe that the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, is anything important or anything. I think they've come back a little bit where they do have some kippot there, but I know in Fort Worth, when I first moved there, I didn't go to the Reform Temple, but the rabbi wouldn't allow kippot at the shul because you shouldn't wear it. And Michael can tell you more because he grew up in Fort Worth. I don't even think they had talism there. They didn't want them associating with the conservative people. They weren't conservative at the time; they were traditional. But it was almost anti everything. It was like, we want to be Jewish, but we don't even accept that there are rules. I can understand if people say there are rules, I just don't want to do them. That's one thing. But if you say those rules they're not even important anymore, it's like, you need bacon because now you can cook pork appropriately and everything. I think they just kind of threw everything out. But I also know in the Federation movement, there's also civil Judaism, which is kind of reform, but they only believe they believe in nothing other than just being part of Am Yisrael, but not anything. And also a lot of Reform temples don't have Israeli flag there. They won't have an Israeli flag.
Yeah, I think a lot of this was included. We haven't even completed the description. We're certainly historically at an early stage And certainly some things have developed, by the way, in all kinds of directions. Like you say, they may have at one point said no kippot, and then they say, well, we'll be more liberal towards that. We'll allow kippot or different kinds of things. But yes, they are very the basic idea of what I was describing is an attitude that says we want to remain with something Jewish about us in our synagogue, but we're not doing it by religious law. It wasn't by a discussion of Jewish sources and we reach a new halachic decision. It was just about what we're comfortable with or not comfortable with, what makes us very different from others, what doesn't make us very different from others. Those were the kind of considerations. I think we have to recognize these as before we even put together an attitude towards it, to accept that this is the kind of, these are the considerations that were made there. I think I'm trying to be honest, and if someone knows otherwise, please speak up, but I think this is an honest description of at least the beginning of reform, including some of the places where it has reached today. And I'm saying what I said before, it's on the one hand, the positive aspect of it is that for some people, like you said about birthright, Michael, it keeps them some connected in some way. They grow up knowing that they're Jewish. If they didn't have that, they wouldn't even know that they're Jewish. And you know, maybe they'll come to Israel on some mission, and maybe they will connect to Judaism in a different way. Maybe in a weird way, this happens sometimes. Maybe because they're Jewish, they will feel, and they know that they're Jewish, they will feel more responsible to be anti-Israel about their genocide because of a certain war, all kinds of things. And in a funny way, sometimes these things end up making someone look into what Judaism is. So it's better, I would think, it's better having that than not having anything. And at the same time, I totally agree, it's watering down Judaism. We have not completed describing it. So we're in the middle of the way. I wouldn't yet say we have described the full description. And I would say to your comment, Mark, that Orthodox religious Jews consider anyone who was born Jewish, whether you keep nothing or keep some or try to keep as much as you can, whether you believe or don't believe, a person who's born Jewish is Jewish. And if someone is Jewish and Reform, I think I think this is probably agreed by all the different groups of Orthodox groups in Israel, that the individual Jew who is Reform, who is a Reform rabbi, who is a Reform leader, is a Jewish brother or sister. If they are not busy struggling against what someone understands as religion, then I don't have any negative issues with him. If this is his thing that he does in his home or in his synagogue, he's my brother. I don't like what he's doing. I don't respect it, maybe. I certainly don't agree with it. He's Jewish. If you ask me if I should help him if he's in trouble, yes. If I should send my army to take him out if he's taken captive somewhere, absolutely. So I don't think that is in question within Orthodoxy. It becomes a question when, and we didn't get to it yet, we will get to it, probably not today apparently, we will get to it when we get to conversion. What do they do with conversion? What do they do with mixed marriages? I agree with Michael. I'm not saying about what to do about it, but this is where it becomes problematic, because then we have differences of opinion about who's Jewish or not. But until it comes to intermarriage or conversion, they are Jewish, period. We agree, we disagree. If they want equality in the religious system in Israel, there's a struggle. If they want to influence the Israeli society, we will start discussing, is this a struggle or is this legitimate? These are discussions that we can have. But just as individuals, as people who are Jewish, yes, Orthodoxy all across the line will say, yes, they're Jewish. I will tell you a story about that soon, but Ilana wants to say something.
Yeah, I've heard a number of generalizations about Reform Judaism, and I just want to say that in the 60s already, I think in my last year of high school already, I was teaching Hebrew school in a very large Reform synagogue. And if you look at the textbooks that the kids were taught, it was nothing so anti as what I'm hearing overgeneralized. And certainly in the sanctuaries, there were Israeli flags anywhere that I've worked in a Reform synagogue as a Jewish educator. So I guess it depends on, what your experience was, and maybe Texas was different than Cleveland, and as well as the Boston area, where when I was in college, I continued to teach. I think twice a week in a Reform synagogue and twice a week in a conservative synagogue. And when I think about what the kids were being taught, or I think about the fact that all the Aron Kodeshes had, some semblance of the Ten Commandments, I think it's an overstatement to suggest that the Reform movement so far removed itself from traditional Jewish cultural connections. I think that's a strong overstatement based on what I saw in the 60s and the 70s in terms of Jewish educational material, what the children were taught, the kinds of songs they were taught, the prayers they were taught, and so on. And I think that you have to consider that there's a broad spectrum of what would be considered Reform Judaism today, just as there is with the conservative congregations, but we're not there yet. But my own, experience, it, tells me otherwise, that I have a bunch of cousins in Chicago and in California who all go to Reform synagogues is another story, but we won't go there now.
Okay, I think what you're saying is valuable, and add to that that I was talking about at the beginning of Reform in the first half of the 19th century. And it goes through changes. And I'm sure that in the 70s, it was easier for them to have an Israeli flag. And today, for some of them, it's more difficult. And there could be different things in different times. So let's not make a generalization, but try and talk about different things. If they retain a lot of Jewish prayers, Jewish festivals, connection with Israel, that's one situation. If they don't, then that's another. So let's talk about the phenomenon, and not about a generalization about all the Reform are X, Y, or Z. So that's a good point for us for the continuation. I'd like it's getting late, and we took a little time in the beginning because of the echoes, and just telling you where I am and what the background about it is. But I'd like to end with a little story. In Ra'anana, there was a group, this is conservative, not Reform. They came to visit in Israel, a group from one of the non-Orthodox communities in the United States came on a visit to Israel, visited one of the high schools in Ra'anana, and they had a panel with all the denominations they could find. So they had Rabbi Gustavo, they had Rabbi, I think it was Rabbi Chen, who's the rabbi, presently the female rabbi of the Reform synagogue in Ra'anana. They had a Rav Chiloni and a Rabbi Israelit, and there were like 5 of us there. I was the Orthodox rabbi. And, people discussed, or, each one of us had time to say something. And then there were questions. And one of the girls from the United States says the following: I was not born Jewish. I converted, whatever conversion she said she did, I don't remember. Certainly not a halachic conversion in my eyes. Do you consider me Jewish? She's challenging us. Do you consider me Jewish? 1, 2, 3, 4 all said yes. They left me for last. The truth is, if I say a yes or no answer, the answer is no. Halachically, you're not Jewish. The way I understand halacha. I thought that would not be a good way to treat the the situation, but I couldn't back out of the situation. I said, you made a journey, you made an effort to join the Jewish people. You want to be Jewish. I want to help you. I don't want to give you a cold shoulder, to turn my back on you. Yeah, get out of here. You're not Jewish. I don't care about you. I want to show you positive attitude and help you on your journey. Which means, if you get the subtleties, it's not such fine subtleties, which means I don't think you're Jewish right now, but rather than saying, no, go away, I said, I'd like to help you. I'm going to have a positive attitude towards you. So that was challenging. But those situations are rare. But in any case, as you see, we have opened this topic. It's going to take us a while. I think it's very much worthwhile. I think it's very much worth our time to continue discussing this and get into more and more details as we go along. So I will make a list of the people present. Unless someone asks me not to, I will try to remember to send to everyone. I hope I have, or send me your, if you're not sure, I have your number. Send me your number. If you don't use WhatsApp, I have your email, I hope. And I will be able to send you Rav Lichtenstein's article. We'll have time to read it. We're not going to get to it 2 weeks from now, but we will get to it one day. And Michael, bevakasha, but please, we're running late, so just something short, please.
Quick comment. Thank God that what you just described may be rare in Israel. It is not rare in the States. Ed and I have both experienced exactly what you describe, and it's never comfortable. One thing that maybe put on your list of things to address as we go forward, I think we're going to be seeing some rather remarkable changes in the Jewish community based on how people have responded to October 7. And it may be that we are all going to be much more willing to accept people into the Jewish people that want to be in the Jewish people. There are also going to be people born Jewish who have clearly demonstrated that they don't care about the Jewish people. As certain parts of the observant community or non-observant community has become more and more generalist in their approach. Anyone who chooses Hamas over Israel, I don't know that they deserve their Jew card. So we'll be, I think we should talk about that down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bezrat
Bezrat
Hashem.
Hashem.
Again next
Again
time.
next time.
To be
To be
continued.
continued.
Good.
Looking home
Thank you.
safely.
Bye.
Safe drive home.
Bye.